Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to run through some key preseason winners and losers who have moved up or down the Draft Sharks rankings ahead of your draft. And even if you've already drafted, this can be valuable info because there are some names in this list who might impact guys that you pick up, guys that you drop to actually improve your team ahead of week one. We've got 11 names, 10 situations. Some of these situations might even hold lessons beyond that specific scenario, like things that you can take into other situations and figure out what to do with certain players. You can read more about all these guys and others in Jared's preseason winners and losers article. He watched the replays of all the preseason games, updated his article weekly with key notes from those games. And now, Jared, let's just go ahead and get to the guys that people need to know more about. It starts with a quarterback. Who is that?
Trevor Lawrence, cover boy of this article. He just looked really sharp this preseason. And a lot of the names on this list are like younger players that we just haven't seen much in the NFL. That's not Trevor Lawrence for me. I thought he looked as good as I've seen him look on an NFL field. It's obviously preseason, but 79% completion rate for Trevor Lawrence this preseason, 9.6 yards per attempt, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, earned a 90.9 PFF passing grade, career high, led all 93 quarterbacks ahead, at least 10 plus dropbacks this preseason. So he's felt underwhelming so far in his career, but this guy's still only 24 years old. He's now in his third season with Doug Peterson. I think we could look back, we could be looking in October saying, this wide receiver core is better than last year. So I think there's definitely a chance that Lawrence has his best fantasy season of his career this year.
If Trevor Lawrence had been doing everything else the same, but had a 5.5% touchdown rate as opposed to 3.5% either of the past 2 years, I mean, we might think differently about him right now. I think it's pretty easy to be like, yeah, this guy's just meh so far, and not understand that it's a young quarterback. Just because CJ Stroud was awesome right away doesn't mean that every quarterback is either awesome or not right away. Like Josh Allen, wasn't that long ago that Josh Allen looked like he was going to be a disappointing quarterback and then all of a sudden exploded. So I'm happy to hear this about Trevor Lawrence. I headed into this draft season looking at him as somebody who could surprise us with numbers this year. We liked the prospect coming in, so there's certainly potential for Trevor Lawrence to deliver fantasy points this year. Number 2, we're going to the backfield, and I don't think it's a situation that's going to excite anybody or a player that's going to excite everybody. Definitely not exciting everybody, might not excite anybody. But Jared, why should people like Devin Singletary?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm not going to say you should necessarily like Devin Singletary. I'm with you. He's like one of the least exciting picks you can make. I haven't drafted him much at all this year, and I think you could even still fade him and be okay. But I do think he's going to have a very valuable role early this season. In the second preseason game when the Giants played Daniel Jones and their starters, Singletary played 88% of the snaps with the first team offense, 79% route rate. Those are like Christian McCaffrey level numbers. Now, Tyrone Tracy did not play in that game. He was sidelined with his ankle injury. I think Tracy does eventually cut into Singletary's workload, but Tracy's a day 3 rookie. He missed some time in August with that injury. I think out of the gate, we're going to see Singletary really dominating touches in this backfield. So especially if you draft someone like Jonathan Brooks, who you're obviously going to get nothing from the first month in the season. Singletary is a nice guy to pair with Brooks. Singletary can kind of get you through September, and then hopefully you turn that starting spot in your lineup over to Jonathan Brooks.
Devin Singletary is not a guy that you should say, all right, in this draft, I'm going to go get me some Devin Singletary. But what he is the guy where if you're into round 9 or 10, you're like, I don't know what I want on the board. I'm not excited about anything. Oh, this team's starting running back is still available in round 10. I guess I'll put him on my roster, and you could be starting him early in the season. They're playing Minnesota in week 1. That's probably not going to be a matchup where the Vikings run away from the Giants and take the running game out of it. Devin Singletary is probably going to be the backfield leader in receiving early in the season, while Tyrone Tracy continues to work back from that ankle injury. And frankly, they're going late enough that you can take Devin Singletary and Tyrone Tracy on the same roster. It's not really a true handcuff because you don't need either guy to do something special for you. Then you just benefit from however that backfield goes. You take any good, you're not hurt by the bad. We both said nobody's excited about Devin Singletary, but at the range where he's going and the ease with which you can get his backup, it's kind of a why not.
Yeah, sure. Remember too that Singletary's rejoining with Brian Dable, who he played under in Buffalo. So Dable obviously, trusts this guy. I think early in the season, he is going to lean on Singletary.
Now, we all like exciting players more, so let's go to a running back that's basically the exact opposite of Devin Singletary, right?
Yeah, Jaylen Wright, a preseason winner, honestly has become maybe my favorite late round target in drafts over the second half of August here. Wright, to me, he just looks ready to deliver if given an opportunity in this Dolphins offense. Wright averaged 5.4 yards per carry on 17 preseason attempts, caught 4 of 6 targets for 41 yards. 5 of his 21 touches went for 10 plus yards. He just consistently was breaking off chunky gains. That's the type of player he was at Tennessee. He obviously had the strong 40 time in this Dolphins offense where, it was easily the most productive backfield in terms of fantasy points last year. Wright will obviously need an injury to get enough playing time to be a fantasy factor. But if either Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert go down this season, and by the way, our injury predictor has both of those guys near the top of running backs as far as biggest injury risks. Either guy goes down, I think you're going to see Wright probably get enough work to be someone you can consider throwing into fantasy lineups.
And if he does break out this season, we've already got a nickname, Chunky Gains, provided by Jared Smola. Wright is exactly the kind of guy that ceiling projections and upside mode were made for, because it's tough to give him a good initial projection. They've got Mostert, they've got Devon Achane. So we're probably not going to see many touches for Jaylen Wright early. And that's the kind of player that would just live at the bottom of the rankings, would never pop at any point in your war room as you're drafting. So we've got those things in there to give away for that guy to move up the rankings later in the draft when you're really just trying to stash somebody on your bench, not so that you can use them early in the season, but so that you can chase the ultimate upside. Like, what if Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane go down in week 1? All of a sudden, week 2, your entire league is having a bidding war for Jaylen Wright, who landed in the exact perfect spot for his skill set in the NFL. So, if you're in draft war room, that's the kind of player that's going to move way up the rankings when upside mode kicks on halfway through your draft. Feel free to go ahead and pick Jaylen Wright up off the waiver wire. Exactly the kind of guy that can pop later in the season with an injury or two, knocking somebody out of his way. Another running back up, another person who's not likely to help you at the beginning of the season. So what should we like about this next dude?
Yeah, I had to include your boy, Tank Bigsby, on this list because he did have a nice preseason, kind of backing up another buzzy training camp. And he kind of buzzed in last year's camp, wasn't as good in the preseason, then obviously fizzled during the regular season. But a nice preseason for Bigsby, 5 yards per carry, 4.6 yards after contact per carry, according to Pro Football Focus. That's a really strong number. He was 15th among 146 running backs in PFF rushing grade. Even caught 4 or 5 targets Bigsby did this preseason, where he was just abysmal in the passing game last year. So it does seem like he's taken a step forward in his second season here, locked in as Jacksonville's number 2 running back. So he is the handcuff to Travis Etienne. Now, the other thing I'll say about Bigsby, though, is he only played 6 of 32 snaps with Trevor Lawrence this preseason. That's 19%. So if he opens his season in that role, he's obviously not a standalone fantasy option. I don't expect him to become a standalone fantasy option this year. But if Travis Etienne goes down, then you're talking about, Tank Bigsby handling most of the work for a pretty good Jags offense.
Yeah, I don't expect Bigsby to be somebody that you can use while Travis Etienne is healthy, but he's a Travis Etienne injury away from being, a slightly lesser version of Travis Etienne. Like, even last year when Etienne was scoring a bunch of fantasy points, he didn't run especially efficiently. So Bigsby had an awful rookie year. You can use any of the measures you want to show that. I think he's a case to remind you that we shouldn't rely too much on those things. I think when those ratings matter most is if they change the running back situation. If we see a terrible rookie season, take a guy out of the running for that same role in year 2, then it's time to adjust and say, all right, Tank Bigsby is a bust. But if the coach heads into that second season and says he's too good, we need to get him involved, which is literally what Doug Peterson has continued to say about Tank Bigsby. I'm going to say, I don't really care what the rating said from last year. I'm going to go ahead and stash him late, see what happens. And if he doesn't do anything for me from round 18, then I'll move on without issue. If you are enjoying this video, please subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel. It helps us know how many people are following along. It lets you know when we post new stuff, which we're going to keep doing multiple times a week throughout the regular season. And honestly, it's just nice to see that number climb up. If we can get to 10,000 subscribers by week 1 of the NFL season, I might even let all 3 of my kids eat dinner on the same day. So help my kids out, help Draft Sharks out, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Jared, more running backs, one situation, 2 names to go through here. What do we need to know about the Houston backfield?
There is no question who was the better back in Houston this preseason, and it's the guy who's returning from his second Achilles tear, Cam Akers, had a really nice preseason, 4.7 yards per carry. He was 10th in PFF rushing grade. Dameon Pierce, meanwhile, 8 carries for 9 yards, 151st in PFF rushing grade. And of course, these are tiny sample size again, and it's 8 carries for Dameon Pierce. But that's concerning when this guy averaged 2.9 yards per carry last year. Pierce, just for whatever reason, does not seem like he works in this running scheme under OC Bobby Slowick. So they kept Pierce and Akers on the final roster behind Joe Mixon. Pierce, for now, still seems like the number 2 running back. But if Mixon goes down, I think both guys would be involved. And I think it's plenty possible, maybe even likely, that Akers just outplays Pierce and sort of moves past him in the pecking order.
Pierce opened last season as the starting running back and lost that job to Devin Singletary as the year wore on. And obviously, Houston didn't even think that highly of Devin Singletary. They let him walk in free agency after the season and brought in Cam Akers to compete. First of all, this situation, I don't want either of those guys. I'll take Joe Mixon, and then I'm not drafting a Houston backup because I'm not interested in a Cam Akers, Dameon Pierce backfield split should Joe Mixon go down. I think the situation is a reminder that situations like Pierce, where you have a day 3 running back specifically, but really in general, a running back who seems to play above his means in that rookie season and leap way up the dynasty market, that's a good time to go ahead and sell that guy. Even if it feels uncomfortable to sell a guy who broke out in his first year, every time that somebody points at like Arian Foster and says, yeah, if you give up on that guy too early, you're going to miss on Arian Foster. Sure, you're going to miss sometimes, and that guy is going to keep being awesome. Isaiah Pacheco in Kansas City looks like that right now. But for every one of those guys, there are many more James Robinsons, Elijah Mitchells, plenty of other guys that emerge from those late rounds and then quickly like re-submerge.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still keeping the light on for Pierce in Dynasty if he gets into a different system, but it's not going to happen for him in this current Texans offense.
If you have Dameon Pierce right now, you might as well hang on and see what happens. But, the next time that somebody similar breaks out in a similar way, consider selling him. Now let's get into a couple of wide receivers, both rookies. The first one from Kansas City, Jared. What do we like about Xavier Worthy's preseason?
Yeah, I mean, Xavier Worthy's play and usage this preseason makes him look like a guy who's going to make an impact right out of the gate. And really, that was a concern for me because we've seen the Chiefs slow play rookies, right? And Mecole Hardman, Sky Moore, even Rashee Rice last year. Remember, he was not a full-time player until the final third of the season. I don't think the Chiefs are going to do that with Xavier Worthy, which makes sense. He's a better prospect than obviously at least Hardman and Moore, and was a first round pick, which Rashee Rice was not. So I think Worthy right out of the gate is going to be close to a full-time player in this offense. He ran a route on 16 of 18 Patrick Mahomes dropbacks this preseason. That's 89%. Had a 39-yard catch from Mahomes, had a 22-yard touchdown that came from Carson Wentz. But, point is his big playability is translating to the NFL. Not a surprise. Worthy also had a 17-yard average depth of target this preseason. The Chiefs have, desperately needed that downfield threat to kind of open up the offense. I think they're going to use Worthy in that role. So especially with Marquise Brown likely out for at least week 1, like that's going to give Worthy a chance to like build momentum in that opener. I mean, if he plays well, I think, Worthy could just end up outproducing Brown pretty easily this season.
Yeah, and Marquise Brown's there on a 1-year deal. So it's not like the Chiefs committed to him. They were like, yeah, let's go ahead and give him a prove-it deal. We can benefit if he shows out. And if not, then we're all right. Xavier Worthy has that opportunity because of that injury. And I think that this is going to get back to being an offense that doesn't have a target hog at wide receiver. Like Rashee Rice probably has to be the best bet for targets heading in among the wideouts because he has a year under his belt. But I think we'll see like different weeks, different winners, like that year where they had Juju Smith-Schuster and others and no dominant factor. Xavier Worthy is the kind of receiver that I like in non-PPR, especially because I think the targets are going to be a little inconsistent. I think his target counts might be a little shorter, but he's got that big playability where he could easily have, those 3 catch, 90-yard, 1 touchdown games.
Yep, sure. Again, they're going to use him deep. I think he could even take some of that shorter stuff too that Rashee Rice did so often last year. Like Rice was awesome after the catch, but Worthy was awesome after the catch at Texas as well. And I think, he obviously brings a different element with that speed than Rashee Rice does.
His teammate from Texas, Adonai Mitchell, is the next guy on the list. What do you think of him after the preseason?
Encouraging usage for Mitchell in a couple different respects. For starters, he was a full-time player with the first team offense right out of the gate. And we don't always see that with rookies in the preseason. We just look at Jalen Polk in New England as an example. He hasn't been a full-time player this preseason. AD Mitchell was, though. He ran a route on 18 of Anthony Richardson's 21 dropbacks. He also played 71% of his snaps in the slot this preseason. He was primarily an outside receiver at Texas. I think the Colts likely long-term envision him as an outside receiver, but that tells me they're preparing for Mitchell to be the Josh Downs replacement out of the gate. Josh Downs dealing with a high ankle sprain, probably going to miss the first, game 2, maybe 3 of the season. So I think you're going to see Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce as the outside receivers out of the gate with AD Mitchell in the slot. And then when Downs comes back, you're going to have, Mitchell and Pierce kind of duking it out for the outside job. I think Mitchell will eventually win that spot and, be in those 3 wide receiver sets.
Yeah, I think it's worth betting on Mitchell over Alec Pierce longer term because we've had a couple of years of Alec Pierce, not becoming anything special. Once Josh Downs is back, I think we'll probably have to see Mitchell and Pierce sort things out for a bit. But, at the point where you'd be drafting him in the double-digit rounds, not a whole lot of downside to get the rookie and see what happens. I'm not high on him versus other rookie receivers because he never really made use of his physical ability in college, never maximized it. I shouldn't say made use. He was good enough, but he never showed out for what he has physically. He remains somebody that I'm skeptical of long term. So that might make him a player that you grab, especially in Dynasty, wait for him to have like a good stretch of games and then consider selling him.
Yeah, for sure. And, for this year, Mitchell has climbed our rankings, but he's still in like the mid 50s among wide receivers. I still think it's going to be tough for him to be a reliable fantasy starter in this run leaning offense with Anthony Richardson, who is still a work in progress as a passer. I think, Mitchell, to me, when everyone's healthy, he's still probably the third target here behind Pittman and Josh Downs, who had a really strong rookie season. Now, Mitchell, as a player, he just has a wide range of outcomes. Maybe he does emerge as the clear number 2 here, and even, sort of starts to eat into Michael Pittman's, number 1 job over the second half of the season. So he's a good bench stash, but I don't think he's someone you're going to want to be starting early this season.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Michael Pittman remains the likely target leader here, but doesn't seem like a true target hog kind of guy. More like a 24 to 25% than a 29 to 30.
I think it's where he should be. He's hogged at times, but that's kind of been
Right.
by necessity. But I think with the increased depth, the Colts have a wide receiver this year. I think Pittman's target share is going to take a hit.
The next guy, I'm not sure what position to say he plays because it's going to depend on the league, but the Saints really want us to be talking about Taysom Hill, whatever his role ends up looking like under Clint Kubiak.
Yeah, well, Hill obviously is only a fantasy factor in leagues where you can play him at tight end. You don't want to be using him at quarterback, but it really looks and sounds like Hill's role might expand under their new OC, Clint Kubiak. There's been a lot of buzz from Kubiak and Dennis Allen about Hill this summer, and then the preseason usage was just fun. Hill lined up all over the field for the Saints. He had 9 snaps in the backfield, 7 as an inline tight end, 2 in the slot, 2 out wide. He carried 5 times for 21 yards and a score. Wasn't targeted this preseason, but did run 8 pass routes. To me, it's the rushing upside that makes him exciting because Kendrick Miller's out for at least the first 4 games of the season. Who knows if he even has a future with the Saints beyond that. So it's Alvin Kamara, who is on the decline. Jamal Williams, who is already declined. He's like done. Taysom Hill might be the number 2 running back for the Saints early this season. Now, that doesn't help as much in full PPR leagues, where I think in full PPR, it's going to be tough for Hill, I think, to catch enough passes to be relevant. If you're in a non-PPR league, though, I think Taysom Hill could be a top 12 tight end, at least early in the season, unless Kendrick Miller ends up making an impact for this team.
Yeah, he's right on the fringe of that in our rankings for non-PPR. And it makes sense. Like it probably seems weird, but touchdowns drive so much of the tight end rankings in that non-PPR format, especially. And Taysom Hill brings you multiple ways that he can score touchdowns. I agree with you that he's only relevant where he's a tight end. If you're playing in a super flex league, you might try to talk yourself into him making sense as a quarterback. There are going to be weeks where he works out that way, but I think he's going to be more frustrating than not as a quarterback. He's somebody that maybe you put on your roster if you accidentally waited too long and got kind of frozen out of extra quarterbacks in super flex, but not somebody that you should plan to play unless you need to in that kind of lineup.
Yeah, I could see super flex best ball in a managed super flex league. I wouldn't spend a pick on Taysom Hill at quarterback.
Agreed. I also wouldn't spend a pick on this last guy at tight end, Cole Kmet in Chicago. What happened to him this preseason?
Yeah, really rough preseason for Kmet, who really worked in an even timeshare with Gerald Everett, with Caleb Williams, and the first team offense. Actually, Everett ran one more route with Williams than Kmet did. 8 routes on 14 Williams dropbacks for Everett, 7 of 14 for Cole Kmet. Nowhere near enough for Kmet to be a reliable fantasy option. And really, it's not a big surprise when you remember that Shane Waldron is now Bears' new offensive coordinator, who one has a history with Gerald Everett from their time together, both with the Rams and the Seahawks. And then Waldron was just in Seattle the past few years and used 3 tight ends in a pretty even rotation. So I kind of buy that this is going to be how it's going to be throughout the season. And if that's the case, neither Kmet nor Everett are someone that we can, trust.
And those multiple tight ends in Seattle were a first round pick, Noah Fant, Will Dissly, and Colby Parkinson. So Shane Waldron specializes in 2 things: Gerald Everett and downplaying proven talented tight ends. So what we really need is one of those graphics where we see what Gerald Everett looks like to everybody else and then what he looks like to Shane Waldron. But yeah, I mean, if there's any question about a tight end at that level that really needs volume or, a strong red zone role or something to even make him relevant, there's just no reason to bother with him at that level. So I'd much rather take somebody like Tyler Conklin, Noah Fant, several others in that range. Cole Kmet's just a do not draft for me.
Me too, in lineup setting fantasy league. He has gotten cheap enough in best ball where I think you can still consider taking him as a tight end too. But again, with this usage, he's just not going to be someone you can consider starting in leagues where you're setting a starting lineup every week.
Now I'm going to throw one more name on the bottom of the list that Jared provided me, because I think Marvin Mims bears discussion here, especially because we didn't have enough losers on the list that Jared supplied. So Marvin Mims, undeniably a preseason loser. We were waiting for the playing time to match up with Sean Payton's words. It did not. Sean Payton started the year saying, "Oh, it's my fault I didn't get Marvin Mims on the field." I guess maybe it's still Sean Payton's fault that Marvin Mims was not getting on the field, but he was not getting on the field. He was working behind Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, and Josh Reynolds. Now, we saw a change at the end of the preseason because the Broncos dumped Tim Patrick after playing him among the top 3. We don't know how to read that as it pertains to Marvin Mims yet, because if Patrick was playing ahead of him, maybe the fact that they let him go means that they want to give more snaps to Marvin Mims. But if they liked him that much, then they would have been giving him those snaps in the preseason, I would imagine, right?
I don't know what to make of this. I'm hoping things work out for Marvin Mims because I was drafting a ton of him up until the preseason started. But I mean, like you said, the preseason usage was worrisome. He played deep into the third quarter in the preseason opener with the third string offense. And then Bo Nix started and played significantly in the second preseason game. Marvin Mims ran just 1 route with Bo Nix. Now, like you said, Matt, he was behind Tim Patrick, who is gone. Broncos also cut Brandon Johnson. They cut Lil Jordan Humphrey, guys who, did play some snaps last year. So it's a pretty thin wide receiver room at this point. Like, kind of think Mims has to be on the field at least as the number 3 wide receiver. I was just reading some quotes from a recent Sean Payton press conference, and he compared one of their rookies. They kept Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Marvin Mims, and then their 2 rookies, Troy Franklin and Devon Vele. Payton compared Vele to Tim Patrick. I'm wondering if we're gonna get to week 1 and it's gonna be Vele as the number 3 wide receiver. Maybe doing a bunch of blocking. That's kind of what Payton said. He said he kind of values Vele's blocking. He's a bigger receiver. So I don't know what to make of this year. Obviously, Mims is not going anywhere near starting lineups in week 1. He's not a must stash, in managed fantasy leagues, but we'll keep an eye on that week 1 usage because it's a pretty tough situation to figure out with Mims how this preseason went for him.
Yeah, the good news is that Mims has always gone late enough that it really doesn't matter. If he doesn't do anything, then you've lost nothing by stashing him on a roster, and you certainly don't need to take him. The bad news with Mims is absolutely everything else, and I don't think that this is going to be a pass offense that really supports a whole lot of value. So nothing exciting about him. But I certainly have my fingers crossed that all those best ball shares wind up paying off, at least with a big play here or there. It's worth remembering that Sean Payton's the guy who turned Marcus Colston from somebody none of us had ever heard of into a, rookie year boom who pissed off everybody who played on Yahoo because they had him qualifying at tight end.
That's what makes the situation interesting is that, the number 2 receiver is Josh Reynolds. We know it. He is. So we're really not just talking about the number 3 wide receiver job being up for grabs. We're talking about the number 2 wide receiver job being up for grabs, I think, eventually. So one of these other young guys could definitely be a fantasy factor at some point this season.
Jared, why is Carson Steele not on this list?
He did make the article. I'm not a Carson Steele hater, but he obviously took a big hit when the Chiefs signed Samaje Perine. Steele's still on the roster as of now. I assume they're just going to keep the 4 running backs. Steele, someone you can leave on the waiver wire for now. We'll see how that backfield shakes out behind Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, their immediate signing of Samaje Perine after he hit the market tells me that they think Perine's a better reserve option, insurance option, whatever you want to call it, than what they already had on the roster. So I don't want any second Chiefs running back right now. Carson Steele is going to be interesting to see if he becomes anything, but I wouldn't get excited about any post-Pacheco Chiefs running back. If you still have drafts coming up, then you have reason to get your draft war room ready. It has never been cheaper to do so. Check the link link in the show notes to get the most powerful draft assistant in the industry for just a few dollars. And if you've already drafted, then it's time to take advantage of all the regular season tools and advice on draftsharks.com. The free agent finder has gotten some killer updates this offseason. The trade navigator does more than any other trade tool on the market will. And our award-winning projections drive everything. So become a DS Insider and make us your unfair advantage.